In the interest of keeping us on time, let's get going then. Welcome everybody to our first virtual business luncheon of the year, the German American Business Outlook for 2021. First of all, our team in the background, making sure everything's running well, but also there for you, there for our members, for our partners. Many of you know Jules Voss, our Manager of Membership Engagement, based over in our Michigan office. And then also Franziska Hennig, who's responsible for all of these business luncheons all year long, as well as our other events. So they're up on the screen. Go ahead and reach out to them if you have any questions. If anything pops up in the course of today, you have their contact information there as well, in addition to, of course, the chat. And then most of you also know, I think, Mario Krach, our Vice President. Mario's with us today as well, of course. And that's the core of our membership team that's here for all of you. A couple of upcoming events to put on your calendar already as we get going. Our next virtual business luncheon in Illinois will be on March 3rd. That's where we move into state-specific ones. Our Illinois luncheons all year are sponsored by PKF Mueller, one of our platinum sponsors again for this year. So welcome back to PKF Miller and Dave Nissen and his team. They're great supporters. And then our Michigan luncheons will take place in the second half of every month. And those will be sponsored by Riehle and Partner. I know Matthias Umbach's around and his team from Michigan. So those luncheons will kick off next month and then continue throughout the year. And a special date for all of you, March 18th is our annual members meeting. That will again this year be online. Last year was the first time. This year will be the second. So the main thing to do though is watch out for your proxy package. What that is the slate of candidates for the board of directors. That will be arriving in your office by mail by the end of February. And again, if you have any questions on there, reach out to our membership team. They'd love to support you in getting back your proxy for the annual member meeting. Then we look forward to seeing all of you there on the 18th as well. So maybe talking about today, all of our attendees are going to be muted throughout the presentation. Feel free to put in your chat or your questions into the box on the side of your screen. You can enter your chat questions, and you can also raise hands once we get to the Q&A part with our panelists. Go ahead and raise your hands if you want to go live. If you just want to text your question in, that's fine too. But if you want to ask your question live and in person, usually that works out with the technical setup, and we'd love to have you participate that way. And then the last piece, if you are asking a question live, please do introduce yourself as well as even asking a question in the chat. We'd love to know where the questions come from and hopefully help personalize the answer even more. So after the webinar, you'll get a survey. We want to know how we did, your thoughts on going forward, and particularly relating to our programming this year. So looking forward to that. Our panelists today, I'm delighted to have our chairman, super advocate for German American business, Peter Riehle, is the chairman of our board of directors and the president and CEO of WITTENSTEIN North America. And then we'll have Frank Sportolari as well, who's the president of the American Chamber of Commerce in Germany and the president of UPS in Germany. So Austria and Switzerland also are part of Frank's responsibility. So welcome, gentlemen. I'll go ahead and go through the presentation, and then we'll come back and get your thoughts on what the results are and where you see business going in the year ahead. So thanks, Frank. Thanks, Peter. We'll be back with you in a couple of minutes. First of all, nationally, our survey you're going to hear about today, the German American Business Outlook, was conducted nationwide, and our offices with 6 locations throughout the country. Another special change for this year is that we have our Washington office is changing its structure slightly to be an even better partner for German business here in the United States. So you'll hear more about that as the year goes on, but our great colleagues in Washington looking forward to supporting German American business even more this year. We'll move right into the survey. We reached out to about 1,900 companies nationally got roughly 10% back, 166 participated. As you might guess, as usual, the strongest response out of Illinois and New York, where we have strong membership base. And if you get into what industries, no surprise there. The industrial companies and automotive were the leading respondents to the survey. That represents our membership very strongly, with the core in industry, automotive, but then you get into the others, chemicals, pharmaceutical, construction, et cetera, down the list. Of course, our professional services firms as well, active in the US. And then you look at how long those companies have been here. Maybe a little bit of surprise, roughly a quarter of the companies in the survey, and it mirrors our membership pretty well, roughly a quarter of the companies have been founded in the US since the Great Recession. So on one side, that's a great signal of health and German companies continuing to invest in the US. And then there are those that have been here for decades, successful on the US market and continuing to build their business. So I think that's a good sign of mixed health, or a mixed structure of the subsidiaries in the United States. So now to the results. And I'll tell you, most of you who know me know I'm pretty much an optimist. I have an American point of view on a lot of things, in spite of the German-American connection. And I think you're going to be a little bit surprised, as I was, as we walk through what some of these results are. First of all, only 10% of the respondents reported a loss on their US operations in 2020. And that compares to only 7% the year before reported a loss. So that's not a huge jump in terms of German subsidiaries that reported a loss. And we'll talk to Peter and Frank a little bit later why that might be. And the other maybe surprising part is almost a quarter of the companies reported profit margins over 10% in the US. So that's a pretty strong response. Again, maybe even for me being an optimist, a little surprising that the profit levels were so high in one of the greatest times of challenge that we've seen in the economy in our history. So if you look at where they're looking at their growth opportunities, 92% of the respondents expect their business to grow this year, 2021, and only 8%, way over here on the far right-hand side, only 8% saw a contraction in their business this year. So that's pretty optimistic in my book. As far as the overall US, that was very similar. About 93% expect the US economy to expand as a whole. 7% saw contraction. So obviously there were a couple of companies responding that said, hey, they see the US economy maybe more optimistically than their own, or at least in terms of losses or shrinkage. But if you look back to the other slide, 34% saw strong growth for their own company, while only 18% see strong growth for the US economy. So given the assumption that those companies know their business prospects for 2021 very well, that's a strong vote of confidence that over a third are saying that they're expecting strong growth in 2021. Now, the US market is, of course, very important for German companies. Maybe that's a simplified overstatement, but 19% of the companies generate over 20% of their group profits in the US. So if you add this 10% and that 9%, that's roughly a fifth of the companies generate 20% of their total entity profits in the United States. But where you'll notice those margins are under pressure this year, last year. So that's where they really took a hit. They stayed profitable, but the margins took a hit. Economic challenges, no surprise. Number one is the pandemic. Overriding challenge. I wouldn't expect anything else to show up in the results. And even with the highest unemployment we've experienced since the Great Depression, the availability of skilled workforce stayed at number 2 in spite of that record unemployment. So if you're looking where those challenges are for the companies as they emerge from the pandemic, the same topics that have been in our survey for years pop right back up as companies are still worried about where do I find those skilled workers. and growing their workforce. 43% of the companies that responded expect to increase their workforce this year, and only 5%, way over here on the far right-hand side, are expecting to cut their workforce this year. So that's another pretty optimistic sign that the expected cuts or the expected restructurings are mostly behind us for the companies. And if you look at the next slide, mirrors what we're saying. Challenges, 64% still experience difficulties in finding skilled staff, and only 14% over here on the far right say they never had difficulty in finding staff. So if that's you, I want to be in your shoes. That's a great message. But most of our companies are on the other side where they're having troubles finding their workers. If you look at what the effects of COVID are, it's really no surprise that COVID has accelerated the digital adoption, especially on the communication and remote working side. Even though, if you remember back, most of our respondents came out of the industrial and automotive sectors. So even there, you're hearing the #1 response being the large-scale use of collaborative technology, video conferencing, having an impact even within industry. And if you look at the next section, shifting to work from home, that's a big topic, obviously, for all of us. You saw both chairmen in their home offices right now, and I'm sure many of you aren't as well. But what does that mean post-pandemic, and how does that become a permanent solution? And then if you look at the other piece that's probably going to be a long-lasting impact is that digital sales and marketing. And I think here we're only at the tip of the iceberg in terms of what companies are doing there, and then investing in automation, digitalization of internal processes. So most of these other ones are talking external. How do you talk to your customers? How do you talk to partners? But certainly when you're digitizing internal processes as well. So investment. This is another one. German companies are still planning to invest in the US, and most are planning larger investments than they reported even in last year's survey. So now this survey happened after the election, and I'll take that as a very strong response. If you look at the tiny investments of what companies were saying last year, the under $1 million, actually dropped back, and the ones that took a jump then are basically all of the other categories, the 1 to 5 million, 6 to 10 million, and the much higher investments stayed flatter. But if you're looking at companies and confidence of where they're going, their planned investments for 2021 are higher than they were going into 2020, which is, I would say, a somewhat surprising finding. And maybe the economist in me would explain that as pent-up demand. But we'll talk to Peter, we'll talk to Frank, and get their feelings on where that result is coming from as well. So talking about the Midwest, that's our home as GACC Midwest. The first thing I do is say, check out our Invest Midwest guide. Our team put together an overview and reports on state-by-state profiles, what's happening, what are the hot sectors, where are those investments going here in the Midwest. But not just saying that, hey, all these companies are planning to invest. If you look at last year's Governor's Cup winning states, the overall resounding answer is the Midwest is winning that investment battle. 3 of the top 5 states in Site Selection Magazine's Governor Cup last year are in our territory. Ohio, Illinois, Indiana, great stories. And I'll tell you what, the rest of the Midwest fared really well in their study as well. And more importantly, these are actual investments. These are based on investment companies investing in those states. These aren't business climate of who's got the best regulations or who's got the best infrastructure. These are actual companies voting with where they're putting their investments. And that's what I love about the Site Selection Magazine rankings so much, is they're showing where people are actually investing. And again, that's landing in the Midwest. And if you look at metros, Chicago, #1 in the country. And that's for 7 years in a row in last year's results. So it's not just a fluke. and more than that, Chicago, if you look at the actual data, was about 50% more projects than Houston. So that's a strong sign of where investment projects are landing in the US. And then you look at number 5 with Cincinnati, maybe more intriguing if you go down to the small and mid-sized cities. Almost half of the top 10 of each of the small and the mid-sized, so I think 9 of the top 20 out of those categories landed also in the Midwest. So it's not just happening in the big cities. We have great small towns all across the Midwest that are winning those investments. So that'll be another question for especially Peter Riehle. Now, what are big questions around the concerns and policy desires heading into this new administration right now? Number one, maybe no surprise, is open markets and trade agreements. Companies want certainty in knowing that they're going to be able to move their goods, and open markets and trade agreements are certainly what won that day in terms of the policy fields that the companies see as most important to growing their U.S. operations. And number two, work visas. Getting their key personnel into the U.S. and knowing they can go back and forth. And time again, that's shown that's what leads to those investments and jobs, because when you know you can get your plant manager in the country, when you know you can get your next CEO in the country for your U.S. operation, then you know you're going to be able to build and expand your workforce. If that's thrown in question because you can't get them a work visa, then in general, that's where the chain starts to break and companies' confidence in continuing investment starts to wane. So with that, the next key point is, as far as the responses of what is your company changing in its supply chain, and we have a supply chain expert on the line here today too, but we asked them, what are you doing to change your supply chain strategy to be more resilient? And right at the top of that was finding alternate sourcing options. So spreading out that supply chain from getting over concentrated. And we heard this after Fukushima years ago and other crises. And I guess the big question for us is, has that lesson been learned and taken to heart, and will we see a significant change now post-COVID? And certainly the other topics of digitalization and automation show up again, as well as the vertical integration and downstream integration to win on cost efficiency. So those were the big answers there. One topic you didn't see show up as strongly in there is reshoring. I think we'll talk to Peter particularly about that, is how he sees investment decisions being made of where companies are choosing to site their supply chains. So now it's time to get to our panelists, my favorite part of the day. I promised it'd be a quick run through of our survey results, and they're back with us right on time. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing the presentation so you can see Peter and Frank. There we go. You should be able to see all three of us on your screens right now. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me. I'll do a quick reintroduction. Peter Riehle, again, chairman of the board of directors for GACC Midwest and president and CEO of WITTENSTEIN North America. Thank you for being with us today, Peter.
Thank you.
And also for all your time and dedication to our network, to our member companies. Without you, we wouldn't have been able to get through this last year. So thank you for all you do.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me.
And then we have Frank Sportolari, who's the president of AmCham, our good partners over in Germany, and also president of UPS for Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. Not to mention, Frank's a native Chicagoan, so we have your Midwest roots here as well. Welcome back, welcome home. Good to have you with us today, Frank.
Thank you.
So maybe, Frank, you're our special guest today here. We'll start with you. We've heard that German companies in the U.S. have to say about the upcoming year, how the pandemic's impacted their business this past year. But in your role as chairman of AmCham, as well as president of UPS in Germany, you're really uniquely placed to hear from the U.S. companies doing business in Germany. Are the U.S. companies in Germany as optimistic about their future in the coming year as their counterparts just showed on this side of the pond?
Well, Mark, we have to be a little bit careful in making too many conclusions about business sentiment during the COVID era, right? So many
Yep.
things have changed. Having said that, though, you said a little bit earlier when you were presenting the results how surprised you were by the positivity of the sentiment. And on our side, it's no different. I mean, I think that just underlines the fact that even after 4 years of say geopolitical turbulence, tariffs that were unwanted and unexpected, and now COVID, there's still an incredibly strong desire to do business in each other's markets. And I personally think that for many of our American companies, in fact, I know, and it's a true statement for UPS, for many American companies, after their home market, Germany is the #1 market, the #1 market they have abroad. And there's unbroken interest in Germany for the many reasons that make it a very attractive place to invest and do business. And there's no change there. Certainly, COVID has slowed some things down, made a few things very difficult, but I think once that gets sorted out, we'll be back to business as usual.
Hey, that's a great message. Peter, WITTENSTEIN, one of the great things is you have customers across so many industries. It's been a strength for your company and certainly for your leadership of the chamber. Everything from metalworking to food processing to space. Are your customers telling you the same things that we heard in the survey?
Correct. We hear the same thing. As we are WITTENSTEIN, we are serving roughly 35 different industries, machine tools, but not as a priority because there is not a large machine tool industry like in Germany or Italy, for example. But food processing, packaging industry, especially here in the Midwest, is big, but automotive, aerospace, woodworking across the board. And then you have industries which are in the service arena. For example, think about Disney World or Universal Studios, Harry Potter rides. That's also motion. So we move people as well there. But as everybody is aware of it, due to COVID-19, Disney World and entertainment business in general, the movie theaters, they are all closed for obvious reasons. However, the other industries, especially medical packaging, food processing, food packaging, had a big surge in 2020. That's what we get as feedback from our customers. And this will remain in 2021. Some of these industries even see a surge, like woodworking. Think about the housing market in the United States right now. New homes all over the place. The prices are going up. Interest for mortgages is very low. So the woodworking industry, automation, robotics are all part of that upswing. Our customers and we as German companies and our members are fairly optimistic about 2021, about the economy, and there is a wave of investments coming, which in some industry is due to COVID-19 did not happen. And we expect it will happen this year. And we see already the first signs in our industries. There's an uptick since October, November, December, and January. This January was for our company one of the best months in the last 14 months.
Wow. Well, let's stick with your view of the different industries. We talked about this with our partners, KPMG, who helped put the German American Business Outlook survey together with us. Only 8% of the companies in our survey are expecting a decline in revenues this year, after about 40% saw a drop in 2020. Are they being too optimistic? Is this January thing just a temporary catch-up in demand, or is this a case where there's no place to go but up after a difficult 2020?
I would not say there's no place to go up, but there's demand, and we have to understand there's also money in cash available. Loans are very cheap, so it's not a question like in the financial crisis that the financial system collapsed. So and we feel the demand. Our engineers, the engineers from our members, quote activity, interest in our products is still there and is going up. So we expect more orders. You cannot predict really or say now January was a good month. We see that trend, and the trend is going up, and it will maintain because many, also we as WITTENSTEIN, we didn't generate the revenue like in our best years last year. But we are talking about that, I think, later on as well. But yes, there will be the way up because the demand is there and it's given.
So Frank, most economists are predicting that the U.S. recovery is going to bounce back in the range of 4 to 6% growth this year, whereas Germany's been more in the 3% range. Some have been even a little more pessimistic than that. But seeing both sides of the Atlantic like you do, you see the freight, you see companies active in both countries. Is there a difference in optimism or the fundamental business climate between what's happening in Europe and what's happening in the US right now?
No, Mark, I would just say that reflects what you historically have. The US market grows at a faster pace than any European market. And, if you look at Germany since the 50s, growth rates there by US standards would be unacceptably low. It's a different model, just a kind of different way of doing business. And in the US, you do expect several percent points more every year. The US is showing itself to be more willing to provide stimulus, right? Germany is obviously very much devoted to a balanced budget, even legislation that requires certain things to be done if it looks like there's going to be an imbalance. There's no talk of massive stimulus plans like there are in the US. And I do think the US market will bounce back for that reason. I mean, you have other things. You have a growing deficit. You have other factors that are out there somewhere. But for the time being, I think the US will be more likely to snap back and show a higher growth rate than Germany this year and the coming years, quite frankly.
Well, and you have a younger and more strongly growing population that drives that as well. If the population's growing,
that's right. Exactly right.
It's going to grow.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe one point we should, Mark, yeah, thank you. One point we should consider: the U.S. economy is driven by the consumer. 70% is consumer driven, and the rest is business and government driven. So, and as we are all aware, the consumer couldn't really spend the money in the last year. Restaurant business, movie theaters, entertainment parks, theme parks, travel, and many other service areas. And again, as I said it earlier, the money is there, and it's only a question: can you spend it? And as soon as this entertainment business is accessible, up to a certain point, and COVID gets under control, then the money will be spent and the economy will grow.
Yeah, I think that goes back to that pent-up demand comment as well, is that how much of that is going to drive forward non-profitability. Peter, we talked about it. Only 10% of the companies saw a loss in their U.S. operations in 2020, in spite of the sharp drop in the economy and the lockdowns. Some have attributed that to the quick cost cutting or restructuring a lot of companies did. But what do you think drove the overall positive story on profitability for German companies in the US?
Yeah, so I believe, first of all, extremely flexibility of these companies, good planning, and very quickly adaptation to the actual situation. For our company, I have to say, there was no trade show. There was no travel, and we have to cover a continent here from the East Coast to the West Coast, down to Mexico, down to Brazil, and there was simply no travel allowed. Everything had to be made from home, so speaking, virtual and with the tools available. It worked, and that's one big portion and share of costs, travel, and these trade shows. I hope it's coming back, that we can spend the money, but extremely flexibility and good budgeting was also key in this situation, and not wait too long. You had to react really quickly, and some companies can react faster than others. It depends also on the business you are in, what infrastructure you have. Also, it depends which industry you are working.
Yeah, Frank, talking about the profitability, looking at Germany, media reports are out there about a potential wave of bankruptcies if more isn't done to support German companies. Granted, it sounds like a lot of that solvency is within certain sectors of the economy, but is there a potential wave of bankruptcies coming to Germany, or is that really just being overplayed by the media right now?
Well, I think, if you live in Germany long enough, you realize one thing. Germans do a lot more soul searching and tend to be a little bit more dampened about the outlook than Americans are, right? We could be sometimes almost naively optimistic, and then at the end, usually things work out a little bit better than what public sentiment says. Certainly, in many sectors, there's, hotels, airlines, the big convention centers, the airports. There's real problems there, and there's going to be real problems in those sectors all over the world. But I think, Peter, what he said is true. Companies have turned out to be very flexible and very good at adapting. And one could ask oneself, if this had been 30 years ago, before things were as digitalized as they are, I think the effects would have been a lot more severe than what they've turned out to be now, because of the way people have been able to improvise and find new ways of doing things. I do think at some point there's going to need to be a very clear-headed view of whether more stimulus is needed in Germany to help many of these companies. We can't forget the backbone of the German economy, and for all practical purposes, the US too, are the small and medium-sized companies. Big companies can take a big hit and weather it more than 1 year even. The little guys, often will struggle. And I think it's really incumbent upon our politicians and industrial associations to get down together and figure out where it makes sense to do what, because we certainly don't want to watch, things going away that are going to be very difficult to rebuild then, right?
Yeah, well, and then you have the broader societal impacts as well that would follow from that type of, closures or bankruptcy. And you talked a lot about people. Peter mentioned people. Our employees all across our membership have had to adapt as well. And Peter, I know workforce is a topic close to your heart. In spite of record unemployment, our employers are telling us that finding skilled people is one of their biggest challenges even now. Wouldn't young people be flocking to apprenticeship programs saying, hey, how do I get into WITTENSTEIN now, given the challenges in the labor market?
I hope they do, because we need more talent. Not so many applicants are applying for our ICAT apprenticeship program. I think it's more independent of the actual unemployment rate to find good people. So we decided, I think in 2015, we started together with the colleges, our members, and the German-American Chambers in United States, a German-style apprentice program, and it works very well for us to grow your own seed, so speaking, and it works very well. So are they flocking in? We have good candidates. We need more candidates because there is a demand in skilled workers, for our members, for our companies, mostly in the arenas of high tech. CNC operators, machines are very complex, mechatronics, automotive industries, and many others. So we have to do a good job in promoting that program and make it more visible here in the United States, because I believe, and our members confirming that it's a very good program. We at Wittgenstein, we have 4 apprentices, and since we hire every year new apprentice, and it's a 3 years plus 2 years program, have never had to hire again the CNC operator for our very expensive machines here in Bartlett to run these machine tools. So it's important that we keep that going.
Okay. Frank, your people, UPS, lifeblood of keeping the economy going, in the lockdowns, in the economy, delivering all the basics that everybody needs, but also supply chains. But are you seeing any differences then for you? The DIHK put out reports that many companies can't find enough new apprentices, but overall the total number of new apprentices is down due to the lack of hiring, particularly in kind of the hospitality industries. But what's the situation like for UPS and maybe more broadly AmCham's members too?
Well, certainly for UPS, we have apprentices. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, sorry. I was having a little bit of trouble here with my connection. UPS has 20,000 employees in Germany, and those fall into a lot of different categories. And we have a lot of different types of apprentices, mechatronicers or auto mechanics, office people, equipment engineering specialists, all kinds of specialized trades. And I can't say that we personally have had particular challenges in finding people, but I do hear from some of our members, some trades are getting a little bit out of fashion. And I know some companies do say they struggle a little to find the people they need. Part of it, I think, is the problem that you see in a lot of European economies. There's
That's all good, Frank.
somewhat like in the US, I hate to say it, there's no over-reliance on university education as the next step after high school without any consideration of as a vocational training at the high level that it's given in Germany as being, at least it's equal. If you're a Meister as a mechanic, believe me, you've certainly got the equivalent at least of a master's degree somewhere. And I think it's important that appreciation is kept up and that there's a lot of recognition for the fact, and in my mind, quite frankly, one of the secret ingredients in Germany that makes it so successful in industrial manufacturing is the whole setup of the school system, with the dual system and everything that's offered there. So I think it's an essential part of the economy, and it's certainly one that we need to keep our eye on. And by the way, I think, we need to have a chat maybe sometime in the near future, guys, about how maybe AmCham and the GACC could work together on setting up additional programs in the US. I think what would be very interesting is if companies like UPS, American companies, take that knowledge back home and say, hey, this works great in Germany, why can't we do it in the US? And quite frankly, I'm fighting that battle a little bit. I mean, for a German company to do it, it's in your DNA. But I think if some American companies would get together and say, this is great, this is what we need to do, maybe that would help generate a little bit more understanding for it.
I love it, Frank. Let's get to work on that. Already within the ICAT apprenticeship program, over 2/3 of the companies are US companies in the program. So yeah, it is catching on. We're getting, that traction amongst American companies saying this is a good thing. But, talking about the US companies that already have the experience in Germany, if we can bring that back to their US operations, we'd love to do so. So, and maybe a note for our audience, many of you, excuse me, know Daniel Andrich, the former president of the Representative of German Industry and Trade in DC. Daniel is now running AmCham in Germany, so we have a tight link there. And many of you also know Heather, who was our membership manager for many years, is now membership manager over at AmCham. So The link keeps getting stronger, Frank.
Very tightly linked.
Let's work on that. But looking forward, the U.S. just went through a very turbulent election year. Now Germany's preparing for an election that's going to result in the first new chancellor in 16 years in Germany. That could be the source of some uncertainty in the business community. What are the main concerns for AmCham, for your members in Germany as the elections approach?
Well, we're still digesting what happened in the U.S. over the last couple of months. And I think now that that situation is a bit more clear and we see a team starting to get put together, thoughts obviously turn to the upcoming elections. And it appears obvious that the big Volksparteien, the CDU, CSU, and the SPD are going to be significantly diminished compared to what they were years ago. There'll obviously be another coalition. Most people are thinking it's going to be CDU, CSU, and the Greens. And then, there's been a lot of questions asked. What will that do for the future of business? I think that one of the things the AmCham wants to start doing right now is reaching out, particularly to the Greens, and making sure that there's an understanding of why Germany is considered attractive and how easy it would be to remove some of those factors then that make other locations in Europe maybe more attractive. And I don't think anyone wants that. And I think that that's going to be a very important role for us in the near future. I don't think, as I say, there's so many factors that speak for Germany. I think you'd have to do a lot of damage before people would turn away, but we really want to be on the forefront of helping to shape at least the expectations of the business community or the international business community around this upcoming election.
Peter, you've lived in the U.S. now throughout Chancellor Merkel's term, the last 16 years plus. Do you see a change in German leadership meaningfully impacting the transatlantic relationship? Most people now are focusing on, hey, what's the change in the U.S. administration mean for the transatlantic relationship? We're going to have a significant change in Germany probably, but do you view that ever changing Germany's approach to the transatlantic relationship?
Yeah, I hope. Also, it's in both directions. We had a problem, and it's hopefully solved now. I expect from the new administration in Washington more multilateral dialogues in the future, discussions, even if there is a different approach to an existing problem, but talking to each other, a certain predictability. And not tweet every 24 hours something different. Also getting really rid of the uncertainty on our side. And I expect the same on the German side as well from new leadership there, that this dialogue will be filled with richness and clear commitments and decisions for both economies and especially trade. We need free trade. Tariffs are hindering free trade. We are coming to that topic later on, hopefully. But that's something it has to be discussed and solved for our members on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean.
Well, Peter, you brought it up, so let's go there right now. Free trade. And I know Frank's going to chime in on this one too, but for the first time ever, our survey showed companies citing their #1 policy desire was open markets and trade agreements. Even though the survey was conducted after the elections, where presumably people figured that there was going to be a change in at least tone in Washington. But usually that category didn't even crack 10% in our surveys, and really accelerated last year as a concern, and now is well atop that list. So I know you're both committed to free trade and the importance of the transatlantic relationship, but what's really driving that angst or common concern amongst the companies in the survey, Peter?
The common concern is, I mean, we have tariffs in place. We had constantly the threat for the German automotive industry in the United States exporting or importing cars here, applying tariffs. But what we still have is the tariffs in place for steel and aluminum, as raw materials we need. Our members need that, especially in our products. And it adds cost, and it really jeopardizes also the growth in the United States. And that's why we advocate really free trade and not putting certain tariffs in place. And until today, with the new Biden administration in Washington, there is no change yet seen. So we'll see what's happening and how the administration in Washington will react and really support open borders and free trade. Very important for our members, for our companies here, which are in the most important market for German company, or one of the most important market, North America, and we want to invest and grow here.
Well, and that's a great point. We've talked about it many times. If you want to manufacture here, you need to be able to get components in the country. You need to be able to have those raw materials. And it doesn't help when you're competing against other companies that are producing everything abroad and maybe have a lower tariff rate then for the finished product than you do when you're buying the raw materials to make them here. So, but Frank, let's go. AmCham is obviously a very outspoken organization on free trade. It affects your day-to-day business with UPS dramatically. What are companies telling you why that continues to be such a concern?
Well, I think Peter kind of pointed it out. It's all very theoretical until you wake up one day and you find out that the product you need isn't available anymore, or it's going to cost 10% more. And there's so much evidence, academic evidence, that these kind of tariffs help no one, and they actually generally end up hurting the company that applies them. And I think that's certainly true for the steel and aluminum tariffs. I think, for example, the shortage of chips that are needed in auto manufacturing has been exacerbated by some of the steps that have been taken against China. It ends up, and we should never forget this, because when you're in business, one lesson I've learned in all the years is at the end of the day, a consumer buys something, regardless what you're doing. If you're making 100-ton ingots of iron or whatever, at the end of the day, that somewhere, somehow gets translated into a product that the consumer has to buy. And anytime you put up barriers to that, you lower the choice, you make it more expensive, you stifle innovation, and it's just not the right way to strengthen an economy. And as Peter pointed out, we have a lot of questions still about the Biden administration and their intentions. He's got his, what is he calling it? Build Back Better, or Build Back, I don't know. There's a lot of Buy American provisions out there. That's not the way to build a healthy manufacturing sector. In Germany, I think any German would be the first one to stand up and say a healthy manufacturing sector is essential for a strong economy. There's no argument about that. But that's not the way to do it. The way to do it is to educate people, to have the right workforce, to make the right investments, to help strengthen your partners. When you strengthen your partner, you strengthen yourself. And going about it by thinking you can, block everyone else and become strong somehow by doing that, it just doesn't work.
I firmly believe that. I firmly believe that tariffs also are hindering innovation and competitiveness. I mean, if companies have not to compete, and we are in a global world, in a global market, and you get some protection with tariffs, you don't have the motivation to improve and to stay competitive. And that happens to many industries in the last 10, 20 years. Think about the steel industry in the United States, because they were protected and simply not competitive in the world market. And I think that's a very important aspect as well. Not only the financial issues and that the cost issue, but also to stay competitive and to make manufacturing competitive in the world market.
Well said. I think I promised to the audience when I went through the survey, Frank, we get to supply chains. You're the expert there. And then we'll get to taking some questions from the audience here real quick. But you're the undisputed expert in logistics and supply chain. That's your business. It's the tagline for UPS. But what shifts are you seeing in your business, in the logistics business, and how companies view their supply chains right now?
Well, you kind of pointed it out at the beginning when you talked about the tsunami and the nuclear reactor in Japan. I can think back to the, this is a ways back now, what, 10, 15 years, that horrible volcano in Iceland that no one can remember the name of. You know, there was always talk, oh my goodness, we have to change everything. We can't. It's easier said than done, right? And I'm sure, Peter, a company like yours must have an absolutely incredible global supply chain where each individual piece of it is put in the right spot for what you're doing. You've worked with suppliers for years, right? You help them improve their quality. You help your suppliers understand exactly what you need. It's not that easy just to go and say, okay, I'm going to move little pieces around. I do think, you know, people have probably learned in today's world, maybe you do need a few more redundancies. Again, we have to remember, if you've optimized your supply chain, by definition, anything you change will probably make your processes more expensive, and that's going to have to be put into whatever formula you use to determine what you're going to invest in. But it's going to be a very interesting question to see how that shapes up. If the vaccination turns out to work perfectly and 5 months from now everything's forgotten, I don't know. I think there'll be a natural tendency to say, okay, it worked out, we're going to keep doing what we're doing. But it certainly is a time for reflection and to think about alternatives maybe. But as I say, it's easier said than done in most cases.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm going to come back to you on freight challenges in just a second, but Peter, you know, Frank alluded to it. All of your products go into somebody else's product, but and you make things move. You provide the motion in the machine, but you also worry about your own supply chain. The steel, the aluminum we already touched on, the automation technology that goes into your products. How do you see supply chains now adapting in a post-COVID world? Will there be big shifts, or is it going to go back to business as usual?
I think there will not be, most of the companies will not go back business as usual and forget about it. But we will look, have a deeper look into our supply chain, our suppliers, and what was happening the last couple of months or the last year. Give you an example. We found out very quickly that all of a sudden the kilogram freight rate goes from $1x to sixfold. And there was no freight capacity available to get some certain parts, as not necessarily steel or aluminum, we buy that all here, but really parts we cannot produce here in the United States, and it gets air freighted from Frankfurt to Chicago. And there was limited space, there was no capacity all of a sudden. So that's something we have to consider and build a secondary plan B supply chain, maybe with sea freight. There's something like that. Everybody has to do that, and you should do that regardless. But a deeper look into the suppliers, absolutely how they managed it with us and our members in the past. And that will have there will be some decisions made. But I don't believe that fundamentally changes on supply chain will happen, because as Frank said, it's very complex, and you have built that supply chain over the last years, so you cannot tear it down entirely and start from scratch again.
Okay. Well, we do have a couple questions from the audience. So if other audience members have their questions, you can raise your hand and I'll read those that were put into chat. So the first one's from our friends over at Germany Trade and Invest from Heiko Steinacher, based out in San Francisco. And Heiko's question says, as your survey shows, open markets do matter. Do you observe different expectations of member companies regarding future U.S. trade policy and how this could affect their activities in the U.S.? So we talked about, hey, hopefully things are going to change. What do you think, Peter, that's going to have an effect on our members' investment, on GACC members' investment going forward, based on what this administration may or may not do?
First of all, companies are not investing short term or in a very short time period. These plans of setting up new plants, new manufacturing sites, or get even more capacity into the North American market, these decisions are long term, especially with SMEs, with family-owned companies, smaller companies. It's a long term, not short term decision. North American market, as I said earlier, is one of the most important market for the German industry, especially for hidden champions, smaller companies, Mittelstands companies, and we need to be closer to the market, to our customers, and that's one of the reasons, or the main driver, to be closer to the customer base here. That's the reason why we manufacture here, not because it's cheaper in US, not we want to get out of Germany, it's we want to be as fast as possible and as flexible as possible to meet the requirements of our customers in the North American market, which are different than the requirements like in Asia, in that region, or in the region Europe, or in the region Germany. These are different requirements. Give you an example, you can buy a car on a Saturday in the United States within 1 hour. My favorite example. Try that in Germany. And you drive with that car off the dealership lot the same day, and you pay maybe next Monday. But that's the expectation of the consumers, and the consumers are also our customers. So there's a certain expectation of flexibility and speed and ease of doing business. And we have to meet these requirements. And that's one of the main drivers to not only a distributorship or a sales office in the United States, you manufacture here and really consult and engineer new products together with the engineers of your design and engineer with your customers. And that's the main reason.
And do you see a difference between industries as where I think Heiko was asking as well, automotive, steel, aluminum, food and beverage? You touch so many. Do you see a difference in which ones are going to be more affected in their investment decisions by trade policy?
It's hard to say. Also, machine tools probably depends. It's not easy in our industries, in the mechatronic motion industry. We have to be on site because we design retail and food processing, or these companies. They make, it depends also on the size and the structure of a company. They make their decisions maybe more dependent on these trade policies. SMEs, our company, our main driver, as I mentioned, is the expectation of the market.
Frank, how do you see that as well? Or do you have a comment to make in terms of where you see the open markets affecting specific industries going forward?
Well, I think Peter said the key thing, which is these are not decisions that are made on the spur of the moment. And, you know, people look at situations and they also look at developments. And I will say something that's come up. The first couple of times I heard it, I was a little bit surprised, but in reality, we shouldn't be surprised. During the previous administration, there was a lot of, particularly between Germany and the US, a lot of turmoil, unnecessary, I think, confrontation. Some things were said that were not exactly what you'd want to hear between friends and partners. And there were threats of the car tariffs, as Peter said, et cetera. Then, Joe Biden gets elected, and a lot of people say, wow, a lot of things are going to be different. Certainly they are. The tone will be different. The way things are done will be different. It's not yet clear what the actual policies that'll be implemented will be. But several people have said to me, yeah, that's all great, but America is still deeply polarized. What happens if in 4 years there's another 180% shift? That's very disruptive. And quite frankly, our last survey, we do something called the Business Barometer. We'd be glad to present that to you guys if you want to sometime. One of the things that came up for the first time ever as a factor that people took into consideration for the US was stability of the political system. That used to really not be anything people worry about. Now, to Peter's point, the US market is, to a German company, it's 4 or 5 times the size of the German market. So it's an extremely attractive market. I think a lot of things that have to happen before people said, we're not going there. And if I look at German companies, I talk to people who are putting up factories in Ethiopia and Egypt and everywhere else. They're not going to be scared off easily. Still, when you make your decision, you have some kind of checklist and you're evaluating places to go. Are you going to go to Canada maybe, or the US or Mexico? And you got to keep all those things in mind. You can never overlook the impact that tariffs and threats of tariffs can have on the perception of your market as the place to sink, maybe $100 million for your next factory.
Okay. I have one more out of the chat, and otherwise our team will help us if there's somebody that has their hand up. I'm not seeing a hand right now, so I'll go to the other question out of written ones. But how do either of you see travel changing post-COVID as people hopefully start traveling back and forth again? I know for me, I haven't been to Germany in over a year now. It's hard to believe that hasn't happened in, over 15 years. But how do you, let me get this right, how do you see travel changing post-COVID as people hopefully start to go back and forth again? Or is business travel going to be permanently reduced now because we can do these calls on GoToWebinar, we can Zoom and Teams?
Yeah, maybe I start with answering that question. I think it's hard to say. It depends on the situation with COVID-19 when we reach levels prior to COVID-19. But I think we as companies, we also learned what you can do remote, but we also learned that you cannot do everything remote. I love to be in my office, but I also love to fly to Frankfurt and go to the headquarters and have a one-to-one discussion with my CEO, with my colleagues, because it's not replaceable. Second, it's also a discussion with engineers on a customer side, or walking through a manufacturing site and see things, what our customers are doing. That cannot be replaced by WebEx or by Zoom or by Microsoft Teams. Simply not possible. So I hope we are getting back as fast as we can, but we have to be careful. And I don't think that we will reach the levels prior to COVID-19 very quickly, but it will get back. And we need to be on site, and we need it. There's no replacement for a personal conversation.
Frank, I see you nodding.
Well, yeah, I think travel will be reduced. I certainly, for my part, to go from Dusseldorf to Berlin for a 1-hour meeting and spend the whole day getting there, talking to someone, coming home, I'm not going to be doing that anymore. I think that's the kind of stuff that'll be on Zoom, and it'll be fine. And I think, even meetings like this, if you had been having it as a lunch, I don't know, would you have had less people attending? I certainly couldn't have been part of it. So there's advantages to this new technology, right? But I think to Peter's point, there's certain stuff where human beings have social needs. You have the need to interact with people directly. And obviously everyone misses that. I think there'll be depending on how COVID comes to an end, if it were just gone overnight, I think you'd see a mob descending on the airport the very next day because everyone wants to go and see their relatives or go visit places or go do business trips. I do think it'll pick up again, obviously, after COVID, but I don't think it'll be back at the levels we were seeing pre-COVID for some time, if ever, because the technologies are getting better and people have learned you can do a lot and save a lot of time, energy, and money by just using things like Zoom. I can actually, this is go to webinar. I just say Zoom, it's generic.
Zoom, go to webinar, Microsoft Teams, we've used it, WebEx, we've used them all, right? And I think that's the point, the right tool for the right job. And, you know, we're all in some way in the people business and connecting people. AmCham, the GACCs, our members need to connect. But if you can do it quickly over, you know, a Zoom or webinar, go ahead and do that. And we love being able to tie you into this, Frank, and maybe that will bring some tighter relationships. But then, you know, I'm looking forward to the day when I can walk over and sit down in the AmCham office in Frankfurt and work with the colleagues there and plot out paths forward to bring our people even closer together. And maybe a last one, unless there's another question popping up in from the audience. Let's go to the work visa and tied investment. Peter, how do work visas influence companies' investment decisions? A lot of times the media likes to tie the work visa to workforce, but I know in our conversations you look at it very differently, that the visa has a different role to play for your company and our members.
Yeah, so not only for our company, but for our members. The work visa is used from us to realize a knowledge transfer from our experts from Germany. Let's say we put a new line in place, assembly line or new machining centers. So we need the support and help to make sure that we can deliver the same quality here in the United States than from our headquarters. And that's why we need the engineers, the specialists, the experts for a certain time in the United States, and then they go back to Germany when everything is running well here to the quality standards of our companies and our members. And that's the reason why it's not meant to be so we don't get the skilled labor or skilled workers to run our equipment or to design certain products in the United States and then get them from the headquarters. That's not what we want to achieve. We need to be an American company. We need to do that with our people we have here, with the help of our colleagues, and that's how international and global company works. And that's why we need access and quick decisions regarding the visa process, which was not the case in the last years. It was getting more and more complicated. It was a long process to get these specialists over, and I hope that will change with the new administration very quickly.
Yeah. And I know a lot of our companies that are just starting to build their business or planning to build their business in the U.S., it's based on, can I get my key person in the U.S. to start it? And then they can start hiring the locals, but that knowledge transfer, like you mentioned, has to take place first. And that's how you get to the point where you can start growing the jobs here in the U.S. Frank, have you then from Germany on that? And obviously your members are largely U.S. companies active in Germany that in many cases want to send expats to the U.S. to work in the headquarters.
Well, I mean, we have both German and American companies as members, and quite frankly, it is an issue, and it's somewhat surprising and a bit shameful that it's so short-sighted. These are not people that are stealing anyone's jobs, as Peter pointed out. These are high-paid expats. You don't want them there if you don't need them, right? You want them to go do a certain thing, you send them back home. Americans love to complain about German bureaucracy. Quite frankly, on this issue, the U.S. has 10 times more hurdles than Germany does. We almost never hear of an American company saying, I can't bring someone over that I need. I hear often from German companies or American companies trying to send someone over who's German that they run into big problems, and it's very short-sighted. I just don't get it, quite frankly.
Okay. Let me check one more time. There was one other question, or actually now a couple questions in the chat that I'm seeing. And this one I think goes to Peter. There's a question about workforce issues in apprenticeship based to American standards or German standards. So can you talk about the difference between apprenticeship standards in the US and Germany?
They are the same. Our apprentice program, the ICAT program, is according to German standards. We compare our results, the exams of our apprentices, with the results of the DIHK in Germany. And I have to say we are almost up to par, not in the beginning, but now we learned also our lessons. Train the trainer with our members is one of them. But it's a DIHK certificate and a DOL, the Department of Labor certificate here. So it's dual, and the standards are the same standards we use. The exams are the same in English for sure, like in Germany.
Okay.
And it's 3 years. And in its 3 years, we insist on it. It's not a shortcut. And some companies give even 2 years, 2 years in addition, also a 5 years program, either 3 + 2, also right away after you finish successfully. That's clear. You are employed by the company. You made your apprentice program.
I see Alex Nietzsche raise a hand. The questions are coming in fast and furious now from the audience, so we'll try to indulge a few of this. Alex Nietzsche, I'm going to turn you on, and hopefully you can speak to our panelists here. Alex, if you unmute your microphone, can we hear you? Let's see. Alex, do you have a question for our audience? We'll give it a second for you to log in. Alex, we'll come back to you if you can get the audio to turn on, but or if Francisca can help us get Alex in. But there was another question in the chat from Patrick Riehle. It says, besides digitizing supply chain processes, what are, in the speaker's opinion, other hot topics in adapting to a digital world? It sounds like lots of companies adapted quite quickly in the pandemic, but didn't the pandemic bring up ideas of investing in more or better digital products? So, Frank, obviously, well, let's start with you from UPS. You had to change processes to a degree in the pandemic, but what does this mean for UPS or AmCham's members in going forward and investing in digital products?
Well, I think when you look at, say, if we look at the retail consumer-driven sector, we've really made a major shift over the past 10 or 15 years, and COVID has helped speed this up. You know, if I look at the business 15 years ago, some company came to you and said, okay, I'm going to ship packages to people, and you deliver them. And we would take them, and our customer was the guy who's shipping the packages. We send him a bill, and he paid it. Nowadays, yes, someone says, I'm going to give you a package to ship, and that person generally also pays, but the customer, in the true sense nowadays, is the person who's getting the packages, who wants to have a lot more options around what he wants, when he wants it, where he wants it, or she wants it. And I think there's an enormous amount of customization that's going to be possible in the products, in the way they're delivered, when they're delivered, Are you going to just rent them and return them? Are they digital self-destruct products like renting a film overnight? I think there's going to be an enormous amount of innovation in those areas, and I think that's going to be a very exciting thing to watch. And as they say, the word is, if something can be digitalized, it will be digitalized. And then once you do that, suddenly you realize there's all kinds of options you maybe didn't even think about when you were first doing the digitalization of whatever you digitalized. And that's really the exciting trend that's going on in business right now, in my view.
Is that going to blow up your business though, if everybody can get everything delivered digitally and they don't need it delivered inside of a package?
Well, we certainly, if the day came where you could say, Scotty, beam me a pair of shoes, we'd be in big trouble. But I think those days are far off. But certainly, we're looking very closely, for example, at additive manufacturing, because we think that could be an important part of our portfolio. And we're building up a global network of printers that would allow someone, say, to basically reach any place in the world by using one of our printer farms in combination with our global network. And those are certainly trends that we've got to keep a good eye on. On the other hand, it's also creating smaller, more frequent shipments. If you look at shoes, in many cases now you can go online, customize your shoes, and it's no longer a case of I have 10 different models and 15 different sizes. It's I have infinite number of products. Go on and figure out what you want and we'll make it for you. So there's pluses and minuses there. And as always in business, you have to stay out in front and keep an eye in the rearview mirror to see if anyone's sneaking up to you or coming from an unexpected direction.
Well said. Peter, I saw you nod a couple times in there. Obviously, you're in a different space. You have a hard product, but digital plays a role in your day-to-day.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we had that already. Digitalization of our products, also connectivity of our actuators, our motion systems. So the customer, when he implements or integrates our products in his machines, let's say food processing machine or packaging machine, he will get information about vibration, heat, and so on and so on. So predictive maintenance and also performance monitoring, remote. So we had that, but what we found out now due to COVID-19, that COVID-19 is a huge accelerator of that process. We have now demand from our customers, especially in the packaging industry. I talked 2 weeks ago to a customer. He was able to not only increase his revenue and his profits for sure, but also to increase his output. So he shipped machines worldwide, also in US, and installed and put them in service remotely. But he is asking us, how can I monitor now my machine, how it's doing, is it performing, how can I inform my customer remote or via Zoom and go here and there and change some parameters to increase the output, to optimize the throughput of his machines. So that's clearly happening right now. I see COVID-19, as we learned internally to deal with home offices and all the digital products we are using, VPN networks to have the security in place and so on. It's also an external shift, and it's accelerating the digitalization in machine tools, in food processing machines, in packaging machines, in woodworking, in all kinds of applications throughout the industries. Absolutely.
Here, Mark, I just remembered a good example. I'm not sure, Peter, if you have in one of the thousands of products that your company makes something similar, talking to a customer who makes very heavy-duty industrial drills for the most part. That's what they're known for. They're trying to move to a model where they just charge you for the number of holes drilled, because they said, you're not buying a drill, you're buying future holes. So using the technology, using the digitalization, they'll just say, okay, you have this thing and you paid for 1,000 holes, and that's the business model. I think those are things, those are the kind of interesting things that are coming out of this when people think a little bit further about what new horizons can be opened once we have all this information that a few years ago we never dreamed we would have.
And I think you both hit the nail on the head with the word accelerating. A lot of these topics were there pre-COVID of what's happening with these digital business models. And now that, you know, we have plant managers that like to sit at home on their couch and manage their production machines from home, so they don't have to make an extra trip into the plant, all the way through to, you know, paying for the hole instead of paying for the machine that makes the hole. I think those are great examples. Well, thank you both for sharing your insights, for sharing your thoughts with us as we embark on this year of 2021. We already made it past January, so that's 1 plus 1 month down. And as I think our survey showed, the optimism really is there, and for some quite surprising, the level of optimism. I'll take it as we move forward. Also, big thanks goes to KPMG for working on the survey with us and putting together the results. The complete results, we just scratched the surface. Complete results are on the website for all of our viewers, and a special thank you to everyone sticking through this. The attendee number barely moved in the almost hour and a half now that we've been online. So I'll take that as a sign that they were engaged with what both of you were saying and the content, and looking forward to how they're going to apply that to their business this year. So with that, again, those dates, you'll see the event list on our website. Go ahead, gaccmidwest.org, and get signed up for the next events. We have multiple other programs coming still in February as well, from ag tech, from different industries that intersect across all of our members. So we'll look forward to seeing everybody there and throughout the year. And Mario, shoot me if I don't say this, or Jules, the membership dues, if you should have received your dues notice for this year. We'd love it if you continue to be a part of the German American Network and can process that invoice so we can continue to work with all of our team in bringing you not just the content, but working with making a stronger business environment. So thanks to everyone for the contributions. Good seeing everybody. I look forward to all the emails. Not just about the beard. There were a couple of notes on that. Maybe that'll be our next poll question that we put out there, is what happens with the beard. But thanks again to Peter and Frank for sharing your thoughts with us. And the best of 2021 for you for the year ahead.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you
Very much for
Thanks very
inviting me.
much. Thank you. Yep. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.